Hi everybody, Sandy here. This is my official hello. Normally I give it to you on day one, but as you know, I've been working around the clock like crazy to actually rebuild the structure of the class so that it has all of our materials in it and flows. And I really appreciate your patience. It was not an anticipated thing. I found out that the class had serious structural problems and that you wouldn't be able to make your way through it about 2.5 days before class started. And I dived in and worked literally until I couldn't see straight in the middle of the night to try to get it done. But as you noticed on Wednesday morning, it was not all the way complete. In fact, it was probably, I'm going to say, less than half complete. So for those of you who've been, just poking around the physical online class structure, you may have noticed that there were a whole lot of things, discussion boards and stuff that are not there anymore. And there's some other things that aren't there anymore also. I eliminated the midterm, which you'll all be thrilled to know. And I also eliminated one of the discussion boards, even though I think it is interesting and useful, as actually was the midterm. It's kind of a stream of consciousness midterm as midterms go, and different than you're normally used to. But I wanted to make sure that you had adequate time to really dig as deeply as you can into the remaining assignments, and I really felt that the class had been populated with too many assignments. So let me just talk for a minute about an online class. I gave you a whole video about online classes, but I want to just talk for a minute about summer online classes, or actually summer any classes. Basically, what you have in the summer is the choice of taking an 8-week class or a 6-week class. It is bad enough condensing a 16-week regular semester class into an 8-week time frame, but condensing it down into 6 weeks is almost crazy. And I teach one and I have to grade that fast. You have to work really fast and I have to grade that fast. You have stuff to read and stuff to write and sometimes other stuff that you need to do, and you're basically going to be churning it out. And I have to admit I don't like that, because just as a teaching thing, I don't like that, because it's sort of important for you to take an idea and chew on it a little bit and think about, how does this match with what I already knew, and what am I learning, and how's that changing what I think? And usually to have that kind of reflection, you need some time to chew on these things before you move on to the next thing. Well, that's just something we can't do. However, we kind of have a substitute for you chewing on that material, and that's in the form of the discussion board. Because there are, I think, 22 of us or 23 of us this semester, not counting me, people will bring their own opinions, ideas, and perspectives to the discussion board. And even though you're only required, usually it's 2 or 3, sometimes it's only 1, to make responsive comments to your fellow classmates, I strongly recommend that you read as many of them as you can, even though you're not making comments, because people looking at a topic from multiple positions is going to have to substitute for you chewing on it yourself. So please do take the time to get the most out of this class by reading what your fellow classmates have written for you. Another thing about this summer thing is that even though we understand that we're expecting you to put in, way more time than you would in a normal week, because you're covering so much more in a normal week than you would in a regular semester, other things don't condense. You still may have children who need to be fed meals and taken to school or to camp or whatever they do in the summer, and to their sporting activities, and you still, probably most of you, have jobs that still, you have to be there at 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and you have to stay until 4 or 5 or 6 or however long you stay. And those things don't slow down or condense for you. And so from my perspective, and I think the reason I took the midterm and one of the assignments out, is that even though I'm supposed to give you the exact same amount of material I would give you in a full course, I found that is almost impossible. And so I removed those other things out of realism. I may actually hand them to you somewhere during the semester and tell you if you want to look at them and play around with them and get the benefit of them that you can. I'll probably shoot them to you at the same time frame they would have come in the regular semester. And if you have time and interest, then I urge you to go ahead and think of it as just something to increase your to increase your depth that you're learning. But so to get back to where we are, there is a new syllabus. You need to pull it down and just completely get rid of the partial syllabus I gave you, because in the time frame of the partial syllabus, I did actually make some adjustments to try to make sure that each assignment that you were given had an adequate amount of time to do the work. And so I don't want you to accidentally be operating off the wrong syllabus calendar. So you will just want to get rid of the old partial syllabus calendar and pull down the brand new syllabus calendar and begin to work off of that. If you have any questions at all, if you're confused about what you do next or where you go or where you find something, you probably won't be the only one. So put those questions in the discussion board called Hallway Conversations. And I try to get there once a day, but if a fellow student has an answer and can give you that answer, you might actually get an answer faster from someone else. The important thing is, if you have a question, you're probably not the only one. And if we were in a classroom and you asked me a question, everybody would hear the question and the answer. So Hallway Conversations kind of makes up for the fact that we're not in a classroom together and gives everybody an opportunity to hear all of the questions that are coming up and my answers. You might, in fact, you probably should go to that discussion board even if you don't have a question and hit the subscribe button up in the upper left-hand corner. And it's set up so that if somebody asks a question, the question itself will come into your email box along with the answer that comes later. So you don't even have to go to the discussion board to get the value of those conversations. So I urge you to do that. I also urge you to use that subscribe button in the regular discussion boards as we do them. And that's because if you forget to go there, in fact, you might just want to take 5 minutes and go through each discussion board and hit subscribe. That way, if you forget to go there or you get really busy and things are moving really fast in the classroom and somehow you don't want to miss it, the discussion board will send you a notice that people are showing up and posting things. And then if you want that to stop after you've already been and done your business, then you can just go back into the particular discussion board you're done with and unsubscribe so that it stops haranguing you, as it were. Okay, so let's see. I've also put up with the syllabus a writing rubric. Some people are wondering what I want and how I judge the quality of your writing. And I think the writing rubric will answer that question for you. What else do I need to tell you in terms of logistics? Oh, I've been through now all of your first video, introductions, and I want to say we have some fabulous talent and experience in this class. One of the great things about teaching graduate students is that you're all deeply already in the work world and you have many amazing examples of things that you can bring into class, and I hope that you will, because it's so much richer than simply book learning and even discussion to hear about stories that exemplify concepts. Even if they disprove the concept, it's good to talk about it and to see where the limits of these concepts working and so forth. And I'll give you an example, just a little digression, to validate the whole idea that these concepts, as good as they are and maybe even best practices, do have their limitations. So it happens that I have 400 to 500, I can't remember exactly, hours of training in mediation and facilitation. And I have done a lot of really major facilitations, community facilitations with numbers and numbers of stakeholders. And I've noticed over time that some of these work really well and some of them don't. And way back when I first noticed that, I gave some thought to what it was that was enabling some of these stakeholder facilitations to work and others of them not. And if you control, for example, for process and style, which I could do that by just looking at my own facilitations, which are all led sort of the same way, and then look at what were the variables that were different in facilitations that didn't work, big stakeholder negotiations or community efforts that didn't work, I will say that there are a couple of factors. One is if there is some big, carry a big stick, if there's some big problem that's a big stick that will force a lot of people to the table who normally wouldn't sit down together, that is a recipe for success. An example of that is that the state of Arizona had a whole bunch of Superfund sites, which is dirty underground water, and they had not even started to be cleaned. Instead, for the last 20 to 25 years before this story I'm about to tell you transpired, all of the people who were involved in this were engaged in lawsuits against each other, trying to figure out who should have to burden the cost. And the only thing that benefited were the lawyers, to be quite blunt. And I am a lawyer, so maybe that could have been good for me if I had chosen that path. But the point is, nothing was getting cleaned up. So the EPA came in and said, if you don't change your laws so that there is somebody can be identified as responsible, we don't care who it is. We don't care if you identify the people who did it or if the state decides they're going to pay for it. But if something doesn't change so that this cleanup starts, we're going to retract your delegation. And the laws that govern water cleanup are actually federal laws, but states can ask to have that authority delegated to the state, and then the state oversees it. And most states, do that. And so had Arizona, and EPA came in and threatened to retract Arizona's delegation. Well, it turns out that nobody playing locally really wants the state to lose its delegation, except maybe a few environmental organizations who felt that the EPA would do a much more objective job and less politically motivated job of forcing the cleanup. But there were actually other environmental interests who thought that the EPA was so far removed that they would have a hard time doing anything. So I don't know which thing was true, but at any rate, the other 90% of the stakeholders came to the table, and when they had that big outside stick threatening everybody with something that nobody wanted, suddenly people who couldn't get in a room and come to an agreement, took them about 2 years, took us about 2 years, but we managed to come to an agreement. Another situation where it doesn't work is if one of the people who's at the table is really only there symbolically because they have the power or the option of some sort to solve their problem without the rest of the people at the table, and they don't really care about their relationships with the people around the table. They're just there symbolically to make it look like they're participants, but they don't. So that is an example where participatory practice doesn't always work, and those are two instances one where it does work and it took the big stick, and the other where it doesn't work, and there are other occasions where it works really well and where it doesn't. And so we're going to be looking at some tools and best practices, and if some of your examples from your experience demonstrate that these practices didn't work, please do share that with us too. Don't be hesitant, because it's important to see what the limits of all of these tools are. That's why we carry a whole toolbox, so that we have all the tools in it that we need, and we pull out the ones that are right at the time. Okay, so so I went through all your videos, and you are an impressive bunch, and I am very much looking forward to getting to know you and hearing more about all the things that you've done. Okay, so where are we? I just want to tell you a little bit about the river of my life. I'm not going to make it a whole 5-minute thing, but I will tell you that I started out actually in Kansas in a very, very provincial community with parents who convinced me that I would grow up, get married by 20, have a couple of kids and a dog and a husband who worked, and that would be the end of it. And nobody ever actually in any way, shape, or form coached me in career development, and I sometimes wonder what my path would have been if I had had some coaching early on. My mom did encourage me to learn to type, and she told me that I needed to come up with a backup occupation in case anything went wrong with my marriage or my husband died or something like that. And she said my choices were teacher, secretary, or nurse. Those three: teacher, secretary, and nurse. So you can tell how provincial the community I come from is. And one other funny little story that will show you about my parents and how they thought. I have two brothers, and my father bought them each an insurance policy that they could cash in when they were 21, and that would enable them to have a stake that they could use to get themselves started in a house or a family or whatever they wanted. He did not buy me one because he was quite sure that I would be married off by the time I was 21 to somebody who would be able to take care of me. And so I didn't need my own insurance policy stake. All right, so moving forward, I basically blew my parents away by moving all the way to Arizona to escape from Kansas. And it's kind of funny because Arizona and Kansas are very similar in terms of their politics in some ways, but here I am in Arizona. And I got involved in politics really early. I got involved as a young person, getting involved in campaigns and that kind of thing because I really wanted to change the world. I was a very idealistic, I still in some ways am, in some ways not so much anymore, but very idealistic youth who wanted to improve the lot of people whose lives needed improving. And everywhere around me, I saw that the people who were working on policy issues were all lawyers. And although my first job out of college was a writing job, my bachelor in science was in communications, and I was a writer for a while. And then I moved into a kind of a marketing position in economic development, which actually gave me an interesting perspective on later on the conflict between a simple economic development frame versus a community development frame. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and the problems with that somewhere along the line in this class. But from there, I decided, I got married, had a couple kids, and then decided I wanted to go to school to become a lawyer. Divorced my husband. That's not neither here nor there, except that what comes next was without any help, and not that I'm complaining. It made me strong and determined. But anyway, I went to law school because everybody I knew who was doing policy work were lawyers, and I didn't even really know what lawyers did or were, but I knew that that was going to be the best route to do that. I got out of law school. I ended up being a legislative attorney, which is a fancy, euphemistic way of saying I was a lobbyist. And however, I represented what I thought of as the good guys. I represented nonprofits and municipalities, cities, towns, and nonprofits for the most part. And I felt very good about who I represented because my own values were aligned, and that was something that I have managed to continue for my entire career. So I had fascinating experiences as a lawyer. We worked on environmental policy matters, and we worked on matters of urban decay, and we worked on matters of health and well-being because I was working for municipalities, and they care about everything that has to do with people and life and quality of life, and they also care about everything that has to do with business because they need healthy businesses as employers and as revenue generators and taxpayers and so forth. So for me, that was a very comfortable place of pragmatism. We have to take care of our human residents, citizens, and we also have to take care of our corporate entities. And how are we going to do both things in a meaningful way that does not short shrift either one? And for me, that is how I look at the world. I'm very pragmatic. And so that was a great path. I have to say I have had amazing clients, and I think rather than rattle them off, I may share with you my background at some point in a written document that I put together just so I have it, because people are always asking me to do a little bio for things. So depending on what they want me to do the bio for, I've got these pieces that show you what my background is, and I think I'll put that up so you'll know what my own research is, my own areas of experience, I mean. And then there came a day when I realized that our politics in our country were getting very polarized. As a lobbyist, it doesn't matter what my own politics are. I mean, I have them. I am pragmatist with a left lean, if you want to put it that way. But I had to work with everybody, and everybody comes from a place of values, and there's some validity to almost everybody's perspective if you dig deep for it and listen. Um, but I began to notice that people stopped listening to each other, and I began to notice that it was harder to really make progress. I mentioned the Superfund facilitation that I was engaged in, and one of the things that happened was that about 3 years after we passed the Superfund laws, the legislature stripped all the money to clean up out of it. And I began to feel like we have to do things differently because things at the legislature are getting polarized, they're getting overly politicized, and they're not moving forward. They're 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, sometimes 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And what took me out of that world and into getting a PhD was the desire to study and look for better ways to move us forward while we waited for our political scene to, I don't know, get more sane again. I don't know if it's going to, but I'm still hoping, I still have hope. But in the meantime, I got to school. I decided I wanted to teach. I've always taught actually on the side, and I've always stayed in school and learned on the side even when I wasn't in a degree program. And I love being in school and being able to research what I'm interested in. And so it became appealing to me to share the experience that I had and the knowledge that I had, and then the knowledge that I learned in my PhD program with younger people and give them tools to enable them to do what needed to be done. And actually, in a way, that's this river of my life that led me here has kind of saved me a little bit, not from death or anything, but from skepticism, because the people that come through my classrooms are passionate. They're incredibly intelligent and thoughtful and self-reflective. They are very well educated about the world in a way that I sure wasn't at that age, and creative. The structures and institutions that used to support us are struggling, and I find that the students that come through here are not looking to those structures and institutions as much as maybe my generation, my parents' generation did in order to get things done. They're looking for creative new ways to get things done, and I think that's exactly what has to happen. And so I am very pleased to be here. And I know that this particular class, I'm going to learn as much as you learn. Yes, I start out knowing some things you might not know, but it's the exploration of what we do know and what we don't know together that leads us in new directions and helps us to be creative about moving forward in the world. And I'm looking very much forward to all of your contribution to my education as well this semester. I want to just remind you one more time before I say goodbye, if you have questions, put them in the hallway conversation, unless there's something personal, in which case please feel free to email me. If you want office hours, wherever you are, we can do it just like this, not by recordings, but by video chats. I do Facebook video chat. I like Zoom a lot, especially if there's multiple people, especially if it's something you want to record for some reason, not maybe in office hours, but something you're doing with a colleague. There's still Google Hangouts, although I don't think they support it anymore. It's still up and running, and Skype, and some other ones that probably a lot of you use in your workplace that are possible. So feel free to let me know if you want an office hour. I usually during the middle, I will usually schedule 2 or 3. I'll send out a doodle poll and see what people prefer. My experience with that is I am fortunate if 1 or 2 students actually show up during an office hour, no matter how many said they wanted to come. What that tells me is I need to just make myself available. If you need your own office hour, please let me know. And I think that's the end of this. It's 25 minutes. Hopefully I don't do this too many times during the semester, and I will see you on the discussion board.